A stranger stopped me outside the grocery store, eyes tired, voice low, and said, "Your husband made a mistake he can't fix." I laughed at first, thinking it was some cruel misunderstanding, but then he whispered my husband's real name. A name I had never heard before. "My name is Lena, and until that winter afternoon, I believed my marriage was an ordinary one, quiet mornings, simple dinners, shared routines. My husband, Rowan, worked long hours but loved gently in the soft, steady ways that make a home feel safe. We lived in a small town where nothing ever changed, and secrets had nowhere to hide, or so I thought. Everything shifted the moment a trembling stranger stepped into my path and told me that the man I loved wasn't who he claimed to be. The cold from the freezer aisle followed me out of the store, clinging to my sleeves like it didn't want to let go. Even the parking lot felt quiet, too. Quiet for a Thursday evening, like the world was holding its breath around me. I remember hearing the hum of distant traffic, the rattle of a shopping cart someone left drifting, and then footsteps. Slow, heavy, certain. When I turned, he was already watching me. A man standing by the row of outdoor freezers, half in shadow, half in the glare of the flickering security light, like he'd been waiting for me long before I ever arrived. Emotional setup, 250 words. My hands were full, grocery bags cutting, little lines into my palms, but something about the man's stillness made me stop. The air felt colder near him. Or maybe that was just my nerves stitching themselves closer to my ribs. His clothes were worn, frayed sleeves, mud on the cuffs, the kind of dust you gather only when you've walked far, too far. And the way he breathed, slow, as if he was saving his last bit of warmth for something important. The parking lot lights buzzed overhead, blinking in soft rhythms. He didn't blink. Not once. I looked around, trying to find anyone else. Anyone who might explain why a stranger was standing so still, like a misplaced piece of someone else's story. I shifted the bag from one hand to the other. The plastic crackled loudly in the quiet. He was close enough to hear it, close enough to speak. And when he finally did, the sound felt unreal, like a voice I'd only heard in a dream. "Lena." He said my name before I ever told him. Something inside me tightened. A small, sharp pull, fear or intuition, I still can't tell which. I didn't move. It wasn't courage. Just a kind of frozen stillness that comes when your mind hasn't caught up to your body yet. He took one small step closer, not threatening, not rushed, just exhausted, like each movement cost him something. "You don't know me," he said quietly. "But I know enough to tell you this. Rowan made a mistake." My husband's name in his mouth felt wrong, like hearing your childhood lullaby sung by a stranger. I opened my lips, but no sound came out. All I could do was watch his face, tired eyes, cracked lips, a bruise fading along his jaw. "He didn't mean for it to reach you," the man continued. "But it has. And it will." A gust of cold air pushed past us, making the freezer doors behind him rattle. He didn't flinch, didn't look back. I wanted to ask 100 questions, but each one got tangled somewhere between fear and confusion. "What mistake?" I managed, my voice barely more than breath. He didn't answer, not directly. Instead, he reached into the inner pocket of his coat, slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a small folded paper. Thin, creased, like it had been held too many times. He slipped it into the pocket of my coat, brushing nothing but fabric. His hand trembled. "You'll understand soon," he whispered. Before I could stop him, before I could demand answers or call for help, he stepped back into the narrow space between two parked cars. And then he was gone. Not suddenly, not magically, just the way a tired man moves when he knows exactly where to disappear. I stood there, the cold settling deeper into my coat, my hands shaking around plastic bags filled with things that suddenly felt too ordinary. Milk, bread, apples, things from a life I wasn't sure belonged to me anymore. I reached into my pocket slowly, as if the paper might burn. My fingers brushed the folded edges. It was warm, still holding the heat of his hand. I didn't open it, not yet. Some part of me understood that once I read it, the night would change shape forever. A car passed behind me, headlights sweeping across the asphalt, painting long shadows across my shoes. For a moment, I imagined his silhouette among them. I looked toward the rows of cars, hoping he might still be there, seen or unseen, watching. But the darkness gave nothing back, only silence, only the quiet breath of winter settling on metal and concrete. And somewhere inside the stillness, a truth waiting to unfold. I stood beside my car for a long moment, letting the cold creep up my spine, letting the weight of the folded note settle into my pocket like a second heartbeat. A stranger had spoken my name. A stranger had spoken Rowan's mistake. And the world, as I had understood it that morning, suddenly felt too small to hold all the questions crowding in. I opened the car door, placed the groceries on the passenger seat, and sat there with the engine off, listening to the hum of the store lights fading behind me. When I finally pulled the note from my pocket, my hands trembled again. Not from the cold this time, just from one quiet, circling question. How could a stranger know more about my husband than I ever did? The house was quiet enough to hear the heater breathe. Not loudly, just that soft, steady hum walls make when they're trying to keep you warm. I stood in the kitchen with my gloves still on, the paper still folded between my fingers. It felt heavier than it should have, like a stone someone slipped into my coat while I wasn't looking. Outside, the last bit of daylight was sliding off the roof, turning the windows into dark mirrors, and in the reflection I could see myself standing very still, afraid to open a piece of paper a stranger swore could change everything. I unfolded it slowly, the way you'd unfold something fragile, like it might crumble if you rushed. The handwriting was sharp, pressed deep into the paper, a name, one I had never heard before, not once. But the stranger had said it like it belonged to Rowan, like it had followed him across miles, like it had finally caught up. Beneath the name was a date, circled twice, dark ink pressed hard enough to dent through. Tomorrow. I stood there for a long moment, letting the kitchen light flicker against the paper. Somewhere deeper in the house, a pipe clicked, a sharp, metallic sound that made me look toward Rowan's office door. It was closed. It was always closed. Locked, even when he said it wasn't. I tried to remember if he'd ever told me everything about himself. Not the stories, not the jokes he used to fill silences, but the truth beneath them, the core of the man I married. And I realized I wasn't sure. Not really. The clock above the sink kept ticking, counting down to whatever tomorrow meant. By the time Rowan came home, the paper was tucked inside a cookbook, hidden between recipes I never used. He stepped in quietly, almost like he expected something to be waiting for him on the other side of the door. His smile was thin, a line more than an expression. When he kissed my cheek, his hands were colder than the wind I'd walked through earlier. He didn't look me in the eye. "Long day?" I asked. My voice floated out softer than I intended, almost testing him. He nodded once, dropping his keys too carefully on the table. People only move that gently when they're afraid something might break. While he took off his coat, I watched him the way you watch someone from across a crowded room. With distance, with uncertainty. He rubbed his palms together, blowing warm air onto them. But the shake in his fingers didn't go away. It wasn't new. Neither were the phone calls he stepped outside to take, or the late nights in his office, or the way he always stiffened when someone knocked unexpectedly. But for the first time, I wasn't brushing it aside. I was making a list in my head, a list of things I'd excused without ever asking why. He asked about dinner. He asked about my day. But all his questions felt like placeholders, words meant to fill silence so it wouldn't ask anything of him. Later, while he showered, I stood outside his office door. The air in the hallway felt cooler, like the house kept its own secrets there. The drawer inside, the one he always locked, was only a few steps away. The night felt thinner than usual, like the darkness had been, stretched until it could tear. I had stepped outside only to bring in the laundry I forgot on the line. But the moment my feet touched the cold porch, I knew I wasn't alone. There was a shape near the fence, still, watching. The wind moved through the trees like something nervous, brushing leaves against the wooden slats. And then, he stepped forward. The same man from the grocery store, the same tired eyes. Only this time he looked colder, hollowed out, like whatever had been chasing him finally caught up. When he whispered my name, it didn't sound like a greeting. It sounded like a warning. I pulled my sweater tighter around my arms, though it did nothing against the chill. Our backyard was usually comforting, a small, fenced square of quiet in a world that kept moving too fast. But under the porch light's dim glow, every shadow felt like it carried a story I wasn't ready to hear. The stranger kept his distance. He didn't lean forward. He didn't reach out. He just watched me with the kind of eyes that only appear on people who have lived too long in fear. "Lena," he said again, softer this time, "I shouldn't be here. But you need to know, things are changing." I didn't speak. I couldn't. Because behind his voice, behind his shivering breath, I could feel something else, a thread connecting him to Rowan. Stretched tight, ready to snap. The porch behind me creaked like it was listening, like even the house understood something was coming. "What do you want?" I finally whispered. He shook his head. "Not what I want. What you deserve to know." My hands trembled, but not from the cold. For the first time since the note in my pocket, I let myself wonder if this man wasn't the danger. But what he came to tell me was, he stepped closer, not enough to threaten, just enough for me to see how exhausted he truly was. Dirt was embedded under his nails, the kind that didn't come from a day's work, but from digging through something you shouldn't. "It started years ago," he murmured. "Before you ever met him. Before he ever tried to change his name." The fence groaned as the wind pushed against it, and it sounded almost like a sigh. I swallowed hard. "Tell me what he did." His eyes lifted to mine, and for a moment, I wished he'd lie. But he didn't. "There were 3 of them," he said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, the same one I had seen inside. Rowan's locked drawer. 3 faces. 1 crossed out, 2 untouched. My breath caught. "The one with the line through him," the stranger continued. "Trusted Rowan, followed him, believed him." His voice cracked then, barely audible, and he died because of it. The world around me seemed to shrink until there was only his voice and the spaces between each word. "The other 2? He asked, tapping the picture with a shaking finger. "They're not done. They're still searching." "For what?" My voice sounded too small, even to my own ears, for him. He looked up at me. And now, for anyone standing beside him. It was strange how the truth didn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it came as a whisper in the dark, carried by a stranger who looked like he'd run out of time. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Why are you telling me this?" He hesitated, then looked toward the house as though expecting Rowan to appear in the doorway at any moment. "He's not the man you think he is," he said. "And he's not done with any of this. The date on that paper? It's when everything returns to him. Everything he tried to bury." The night pressed in around us. "What am I supposed to do?" I asked. Before he could answer, a soft click came from behind me, the back door opening. The stranger's eyes widened, panic flashing across his face. "Not now," he hissed. "Not him." Rowan stepped out onto the porch, barefoot, calm, but his eyes were too awake, too sharp for someone who should have been asleep. "Lena?" he called. "Who are you talking to?" I turned back toward the fence, but the stranger was already moving, a shadow slipping into deeper shadow, feet silent, breath held, disappearing into the dark like he had never been there at all. Rowan's hand brushed my shoulder. "Are you okay?" I didn't answer, because I wasn't sure who the real danger was anymore. Rowan stood beside me, looking out into the yard as if expecting an explanation I couldn't give. His breath clouded the air, drifting toward the fence where the stranger had stood moments earlier. "I thought I heard someone," he murmured. I nodded, but the truth sat heavy on my tongue. Too heavy to lift, too dangerous to speak. The porch light flickered, just once, casting both of our shadows onto the lawn, long, stretched, tangled together. But only one of us looked steady. Tangled together. But only one of us looked steady. Rowan slipped his arm around my back, guiding me inside. And though his touch was gentle, a quiet chill crawled beneath my skin. Because I couldn't stop wondering, do I run from the man beside me, or toward the truth waiting in the dark? The house was so still that even the curtains felt afraid to move. I remember sitting at the edge of the couch, the cold from the window seeping through my sweater, watching the first line of dawn bruise the sky. Rowan stood across the room, like a silhouette someone had forgotten to finish drawing. His shoulders slumped, his breath shallow, as if the night had already taken something from him. And I knew, before a word was spoken, that whatever he carried, whatever truth was pressing against his ribs, it was finally done hiding. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind for hours. How I would stand, how my voice would sound, what I would demand and what I would forgive. But when Rowan finally walked into the living room, barefoot and tired, all those rehearsed scripts dissolved like sugar in hot water. He rubbed the back of his neck the way he always did when his thoughts were louder than the room. His eyes were swollen, not from sleep, but from the absence of it. A soft click of the heater turning on echoed between us. It felt like the house was reminding us it was still there. The one thing that hadn't lied. "Rowan," I whispered, the name sounding heavier than it ever had. "I need you to tell me the truth." He didn't look up. His hands opened and closed at his sides like he was practicing letting go. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence settled between us, thick like fog, making it harder to breathe, harder to pretend. And then he exhaled, a thin, fragile breath that said more than his words ever could. Something inside him had already surrendered. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes were different. Not angry, not defensive, just tired. "What do you think you know?" he asked softly, almost pleading. I held the folded note in my hand, the stranger's handwriting still sharp against the paper. "Your name," I said. "Your real one, and the faces in your drawer, and the things you never told me." His jaw tightened, not in surprise, but in recognition. "It wasn't supposed to touch you," he murmured. "None of it." I stepped closer, watching the way he pulled his arms around himself, like a man freezing from the inside out. "Rowan," I said again, "I found the photo, the old passport, the list, the face that was crossed out." Something in him flinched. Not fear, not guilt, but grief. Old grief, the kind people bury under new names and new lives. "Please," I whispered, "I need to know who you were, to understand who you are now." He sat down slowly, like his bones had aged 10 years in a single night. His hands covered his face, and when he finally spoke, his voice cracked on the first word. "It was a long time ago," he said, "but not long enough for me to escape it." His voice came out in pieces, slow, uneven, as though he was lifting each memory from a grave. "We were young, stupid. We thought we were invincible, that loyalty mattered more than consequences." He didn't look at me. He stared at the floor, at the same spot our dog used to sleep before she passed. "There were 4 of us," he continued. "We made a choice one night, a terrible one, a choice that took someone's life, someone who trusted us, someone who didn't deserve what happened." He swallowed hard, the kind of swallow people make when they're trying not to break. "I changed my name because I couldn't carry the old one anymore. I left everything, everyone." A pause. "Even myself." I felt something twist inside my chest, not fear, but mourning. Mourning the man I thought I knew, and the boy he must have been before all this. "You rebuilt yourself," I whispered. "I tried," he breathed. "I tried every day, with you." He lifted his face then, and for the first time, I saw the weight he had hidden behind every smile, every quiet night, every promise he made with shaking hands. "Lena, the only good thing I've ever done right is you." The sun had finally pushed itself over the horizon, flooding the room with pale, cautious light. It touched Rowan's face gently, like even the morning was afraid of hurting him. I sat beside him, not close enough to touch, not far enough to abandon. Just beside him, where truth lived now, raw and trembling. I looked at the man I married, his new name, his old scars, his unfinished redemption, and felt a quiet question settling painfully inside me. Was he still the man running from his past? Or the man trying to walk towards something better? He breathed out slowly, waiting for my answer. And in the soft light of dawn, I realized the next step wasn't just his to make. It was mine.